Welcome to episode 17 of the Acknowledge to Action podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Benko. In this episode titled Initial Success or Total Failure, I'm joined by Brandon Gingrich, an explosive ordnance disposal technician with the United States Air Force. Brandon shares his journey into the military, inspired by the events of 9/11 and his experiences navigating the intense training and high-stakes environment of EOD. We will dive into the technological advancements in EOD, the importance of mentorship and teamwork, and how the EOD community adapts to ever-changing threats. Brandon also offers valuable insights into transitioning from military service to civilian life, focusing on resilience, personal growth, and the power of setting clear goals. Let's get started. Brandon, welcome to Acknowledge to Action podcast. I'm really excited for you to be here. We had some great conversations prior to hitting record, and I'm really looking forward to recording this podcast and sharing our soon-to-be conversation with the Acknowledge to Action audience.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alan, Matt. Really excited to be here and share my story and learn from you as well.
Oh, this is great. I've learned from you in the short time we've known each other. We connected on LinkedIn, had some great exchanges, and here we are having a good podcast that we're going to record and talk about your Air Force career, talk about how you got in, all the experiences you had, and where you plan on it taking you. So, yeah, again, thanks for being here, Brandon. So, walk us through. We've talked and you've listened to a few episodes of Acknowledge to Action, so you have a good understanding and baseline of our ethos and the core values of Acknowledge to Action. I always start off with our conversations. What got you into the military? Where has it taken you? Talk about some of your experiences. Because one thing that really was a draw, I mean, the veteran community as a whole, we're drawn to each other just by default in a lot of ways. But you have a really cool career in EOD, and I have a general understanding of it, but I'm really looking forward to hearing more about it, pulling back some of those layers of the explosive ordnance disposal community. So, yeah, so start us off. So wherever it makes sense for you, share with us how you got into the Air Force and where it's led you, and all the experiences you had over the 20 plus years.
Yeah, so I might be a little bit biased, but I feel explosive ordnance disposal is probably one of the best jobs in the military.
Yeah.
But so growing up, I was always very interested in the military. I watched the History Channel back when they actually showed history shows, and collected Desert Storm and Desert Shield trading cards back in the early 90s when that was a thing. But over time, kind of got more interested in computers and going to college. So after high school, went to college for a year, found out that sitting in a cubicle banging on a keyboard probably wasn't where I needed to be. So after a year, I left, ended up working in a factory for a short time, and then 9/11 happened. So in that moment, like, you see the towers falling, all those years being interested in the military kind of came back, and I had one of those, if not me, then who moments. So a few days later, walked myself down to the recruiter's office, signed on the dotted line, went down to MEPS, took the ASVAB test. They're like, well, we got 3 job options for you. You can either go into weather, you can go into intel, or you can go into explosive ordnance disposal. I'd already figured out that cubicle wasn't for me, so kind of drew a line through weather and intel and asked them, like, hey, what's this EOD thing? I'm like, well, we don't know too much about it, except for the fact that you get to blow stuff up. I'm like, well, that works.
So, like, say no more. You had me at blow stuff up.
Yep. 19-year-old kid offered to let me blow stuff up and get paid to do it. Took a leap of faith and signed that contract. And they also gave me an extra $9,000 for doing it. So that didn't hurt. But a few months later, shipped off to basic training and went through that just like everybody else does. Then I found myself at EOD school. And let me tell you what, way different and way bigger than I could have ever expected. You walk in the door and emblazoned on everything, initial success or total failure. And I mean, that kind of clearly and succinctly states what the life of being a bomb tech is, right?
That's a great mission. So what was it? Initial success or total failure?
Initial success or total
Wow.
failure. And I mean,
I think we just found the title of our podcast.
yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's very clear, very succinct, but there's a lot of gray area in there
Mhm.
still, right? Which I learned later on is the EOD mission is to protect life and protect property and keep the mission moving forward. So it doesn't mean that there's not going to be adversity. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have to try again, regroup,
Yeah.
refight. But as EOD techs, we're not going to accept failure as not getting the mission done. We're going to do what it takes, regardless of the risk. But anyway, so yeah, you walk in, initial success or total failure hits you in the face. You find out there's a 60 to 70% attrition rate, so the odds aren't in your favor.
Wow.
And then you get thrown into a joint service class where I'm a 20-year-old airman at the time, know nothing about the military. You got all this other stuff going on. And then I'm in there with experienced soldiers, sailors, and Marines, which can also be a little bit overwhelming, but turned out to probably be one of the saving graces going through there is having that mentorship. So all those things happening, EOD school gets rolling. And then I found out like how big and how broad this career field is. So from day one, they open up that fire hose of knowledge and it doesn't stop for another 180 days. Like you're learning how explosive works. You're learning basic demolition. Let me tell you what, when you put military grade explosives in someone's hand for the first time, it can be a traumatic experience for some individuals.
Yeah.
But so you learn that basic demo, and then you're learning hand grenades and landmines, mortars, projectiles, guided missiles, bombs, all the
Wow.
hazards on all these different U.S. aircraft. You're learning improvised explosive devices, chemical, biological, nuclear weapons. It just goes on and on. 180 days of that fire hose of knowledge, taking test after test, and you got to be on every day. And
Mhm.
it was a very formative experience. But I think also, go ahead.
So it was a joint service. So because that's
Yep.
really cool what you're saying. So you enter your MOS, your AFSC training,
Mhm.
Air Force, your career training for the military, right? And here you're walking in for the first time as a 19, 20-year-old, and I imagine that in and of itself is overwhelming, whether we're going to EOD school or I got to make an argument here. The C-130 Loadmasters are a pretty cool job too.
Yeah.
So,
We'll call it a tie.
yeah, we could kick that can down the road a little bit, but no, in all seriousness, you walk into your school for the first time, and it is overwhelming sometimes by design and just by that initial experience. You see that mission statement, and then you're in a classroom full of joint service, and you said sailors, Marines, soldiers, right? So from all
Yep.
branches of the service. And then you mentioned that it was a saving grace piece. As far as, was that because they were prior service that you were in there with higher ranking enlisted, or were they just all like you, a first term airman going into their training pipeline?
No, so they were definitely, we had a lot of prior service
Oh, okay.
non-commissioned officers, especially on the Marine side. And we actually had some Army officers in there as well. And they were a great grounding method, especially for us younger, because they've been around the military. They understand how those games work,
Yeah.
but also they understood what a privilege it was to be at EOD school and how much of an impact EOD technicians make on the battlefield. So having them there to help kind of contextualize the experience was very helpful for me, especially as a younger man.
I could only imagine, because it's, again, just when you say a 60% attrition rate, that's tough. That tells me it's one of the harder schools in the DoD inventory, right? Like you gotta be on your A game every single day. There's little to no room for failure or just having a crappy attitude or just a half-ass attitude. I would imagine it's like,
Yep.
like you said, you could have a day where you're a little bit off, but as long as you acknowledge that and adjust and come back swinging the next day. I'm just speaking a little bit from my experience, but like we have our off days. We're not always 100% dialed in. There's a difference in that, where if you come in with an attitude and there's a big difference between hey, I'm just not on, I'm not dialed in. And I imagine those NCOs, those seasoned NCOs help helped with you understanding that. And hey, tomorrow's a new day, tomorrow's a new objective. Uh, get your mind right, get dialed in, and yeah, pick up where you left off, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think, and the other thing that going through EOD school taught me, and this carried me through the rest of my career as well, is that why we learned all those different things about all those different ordnance types I discussed. That's just a tiny fraction of what being an EOD tech was and what they were actually training us to do.
Yeah.
So I think when you look at EOD school, what they're really training us to do to be outstanding problem solvers and decision makers in high pressure environments.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they really teach us to rely on structure, and because we're always using team leader guides, and those team leader guides are really designed as prompts to help guide you through that high pressure situation without limiting your creativity or your adaptability. Also, it's like with those guides, you get through that process no matter, regardless of whether you're stressed, tired, hungry, cold, or hot, and it helps keep you on track. But then just a mindset they teach you there, it's like by the time you get through EOD school, you're like 100% bought into that mission. It's not just a job anymore. It's like, it's who you are. And you also learn how to trust those around you. Because that was the other cool thing, is that we had all those joint service people in that class, but none of us were competing for a spot. We were just trying to earn a spot on that team.
Nice.
So everyone was working together, not working apart. So you learn to trust yourself, you learn to trust the process, and you learn to trust the people around you. And then also, by the time you're done, you just have an absolute belief that you can solve any problem they put in front of you.
Yeah. Wow. What? Who knew going into that? Like you said, as a young man, as a 20-year-old, those life skills. It's yeah. Technically, it's explosive ordnance disposal. There's a very structured, specific mission to that, right? Job set, skill set to that. But what you, as you peeled back the layers, like it goes way beyond that, as far as like adaptability, adjustability, focus, all that. And you can make that argument for just about every career, especially in the military. We do. There's so much value and takeaway from that you could apply in any setting. I can't go in a professional environment, civilian speaking, and just start talking about C-130 Loadmaster stuff. But I could talk about the ethos. I could talk about what CRM is, those skill sets, and I imagine there's so many in the EOD world as well. And that's, as again, I'm speaking for myself, but as a 18, 19-year-old going into initial training for myself, I had no, that was the last thing on my mind, or I just wasn't ready to understand that or acknowledge that and apply that. But as we get older, more seasoned, and that's really cool how you said you had those seasoned NCOs to kind of help plant that seed, if you will, for your foundation, which I imagine then you went on to understand and apply as your career progressed.
Yeah, that mentorship's key. You got to have those people to show you the way.
Yeah, and I think about mentorship and leadership could be like a buzzword. I don't mean that in a critical. I just mean that like leadership, mentorship. And it's not, you just don't wake up one morning like, I need a mentor, and you just ask. You have to earn mentorship. How you said you got to earn your spot in the EOD world. Like, we're there earning a spot, not. And I think that's the same for, you could say that for mentorship and leadership. Like, I want to earn this. Like, there's no guarantee. Like, I want to earn mentorship. So why should this person who's seasoned give you their time and vice versa? You have to create that baseline, kind of like in any training, whether you said it was 180 days for any MOS training, you have to earn that. And you're in that critical phase period where you have to show your ability to adapt and adjust and also meet the objectives, of course, and all that too. So I think the same could be applied for mentorship, but I don't think there's as structured as an algorithm for a structured school. So that's interesting you bring that up, mentorship, because if you asked me when I was 18 what a mentor, I don't know. I would have. I barely knew what a dictionary was, let alone how to use it and apply it. So.
Yep. Yeah, and it's like you said, at that age, you don't really understand what's going on, but I mean, you feel it, you sense it,
Yeah.
and then later on, you finally, when you're in that position, like, okay, I can
There's that
lean
sense of
back on
awareness.
those experiences. Yeah.
It's interesting how you said how you came to terms with, all right, I want to go into the military. I know I can't sit in a cubicle, and based off taking the ASVAB and all that. Talk about why the Air Force. How did the Air Force? Why was that a draw? And then you talked about why D was a draw, but why and how the Air Force?
That's a good question. I looked at all four services, kind of looked at what was out there, and I think at the time the Air Force I was still interested in computers. I was still interested in technology. I mean, as much technology as we had in 2000, 2001.
Yeah.
Right? And it just seemed to me that it was just a little bit more on the cutting edge of technology, and it just, that mentality, that image of the Air Force, just, I think it appealed more to me than the other branches at the time.
Okay. That's it. Yeah, there's so many different influences and motivators. Some of it could be subtle, some of it could be real, like, obvious. And so that's interesting how you identified. Oh, it was because they were on the cutting edge of technology, and that's how they demonstrated themselves, whether from a recruiting perspective or just from an observation perspective. There was something that came to mind I wanted to ask you. See, that's why you can't get distracted with screensavers. That's the last time I'll do that. So okay, Air Force. It was. Oh, so how you, that's what it was. You mentioned early 2000s, 2001. Lot of changes, even just from we're close in age, and whether it's going through things physically, emotionally, mentally, all that stuff. You're going through all that. But then your social environment changes too. But also at that time, I had a conversation with my good friend, Navy veteran. He was episode, I think, 10, I believe. Chris, he was in the Navy. And we talked about all the change we experienced from being in high school all the way to our 20 plus years in the military. And if you inventory that, there's a lot of rapid technology change, from rotary phone to now cell phones to, I mean, the list goes to wireless, like internet. Like, I was just talking to my son. He asked me, he's like, how does Wi-Fi work? I was like, great question. It's pretty amazing, actually. This data just gets transferred wirelessly. It's mind-boggling if you take a moment to think about it. Anyway, I could go on and on about that, but how you and we experience those changes, and it was in progress, and it's like, okay, it is what it is. You deal with it, get the cell phone, adapt to email, all those things that we could go on and on about. How did those changes apply to the EOD world? Because how did your missions to Iraq, how did that affect, and how did the dynamics of war affect how it influenced and how the EOD community adapted to those changes based off circumstance and situation and all that?
Yeah, so kind of fast forward through here real quick and get to that point. So yeah, went to Fairchild Air Force Base right after EOD school.
Yeah.
And about 10 months later, I found myself in Iraq. And the EOD career field, I mean, we were moving forward technologically up until that point, but not real fast, right?
Okay.
Because there just wasn't a lot of emphasis on the career field at that time. So when we first got there, we were using fairly old equipment. Nothing had come out real new. And because the focus was going out there and collecting up all the enemy munitions, stacking them up, blowing them up, which was great fun for a 21-year-old, just stacking up 5,000 pounds worth of explosives every day and lighting the fuse.
So that's what disposal means, just blowing
it up, right?
Blowing it up.
Yep. And then one day that world changed. We were out there blowing stuff up, and their IED ended up being there, and it was the very first one we ever encountered. blew up right next to us, and that's when that world changed, right? So all of a sudden, the IED became the preferred enemy weapon that
Mm.
the whole of the military was fighting. We happened to be on the front lines of that as EOD techs, because that's our job, was to go out there, target that IED, and take it out of play. So we started getting just tons of money and tons of resources funneling in to help us solve that problem. Like I said, at EOD school, they teach us premier problem solvers and decision makers, right? So we're out there, we're breaking down that problem, identifying those threats, we're identifying those issues that we're facing in this new fight, getting that up channeled. And then that's when all that technology, all that information started flowing down to us. And from there, it was absolutely insane. So I think from the first time I went into Iraq, we had one like 700-pound robot that had very little capability and was almost impractical to use on the battlefield, to my second and third deployments, which occurred between 2005 and 7. We were running multiple small robots that were like 70 pounds and controlled by Xbox controllers.
So 700 pounds to 70 pounds. That's quite the scale.
Yes, and we're talking like in 3 to 4 years.
Wow.
You watch that evolution happen.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's what's great about these conversations, because there's good general information. I know the movie Hurt Locker depicts what the EOD could experience, right, and how it was. But hearing those little like behind the scenes, like, wow, 700 pounds. I couldn't even imagine what that thing looks like to a 70-pound, very highly effective resource tool, right? It's just amazing, and I don't know if it's because it's Saturday morning, we're recording, and I'm feeling nostalgic, but it's amazing when a group of individuals in a group collectively focuses on, like, hey, this is what we need to do and what we want to do and what we're able to accomplish and achieve. And just like you said, in that short amount of time, relatively speaking, went from a 700-pound robot, like you said, that was ineffective, hard to use, etc., to highly effective multi-use tools that I could only imagine how that enhanced the EOD community as a whole. And I know we're kind of jumping around a little bit, and you were at Fairchild, and we're talking about some of your duty stations, but you're putting on a lot of great stuff. So that's it's motivating me to ask these questions and ask for clarity. But going back to the EOD community, and it was a joint service school, and you had this experience with Navy, NCOs, Marine Corps, NCOs, Army, Air Force, etc., across the board. How was that? So there's two-part question here. The first one's more out of curiosity. In the EOD community, do you use field manuals or technical? In the Air Force world, we have technical orders and job guides, right? In the Army world, there's field manuals, and there's I forget what the separate subset is. And the Navy, I don't know off the top of my head. But how did that work? Because you mentioned you were trained to deal with ordnance on an aircraft carrier, to air ground munitions, and all that stuff. So that's a huge inventory. So again, this is more out of curiosity.
Yeah.
What regs did you work out of? Like, so if you're on a team with Army or Navy, how would that work? How would the teamwork guidance take place?
Yeah, so the EOD community, we have Air Force, Marines, Army, and Navy, and we all fall under the same EOD program. We're owned by our individual services, but the Navy program for the U.S. Department of Defense is really owned by the Navy. They're the ones, they run the school, they own the TOs. We all work together and help build that process out, but they're the ones that are overall responsible for that.
Okay.
So it all comes down with some Navy flair on it.
I got you. So you're the EOD, and it's probably like a general blanket statement question. The EOD TO's technical orders are Navy based. It's driven from a Navy generated source. Okay. That was just more out of curiosity, and I'm sure. Yeah. So, and then there's checklists that the Air Force puts their, and then I'm sure every branch puts their flair and their sort of stamp on it. Cool.
That's important because, like I said, when we got into Iraq, we were immediately attached to the Army.
Okay. Yeah. All
But
right.
that meant that because we came out of that joint service school and our Air Force team and that Army EOD team, we all spoke the same language. We all had the same TOs. We had pretty much the same equipment. It was seamless integration. I mean, we pretty much met each other at the gate, high-fived, and went out and operated.
That's pretty cool because I mean, I can only speak from my experience. I know in the C-130, it doesn't work like that.
Yep.
It's a little more. There's some more hoops you'd have to jump through to do a collaborative joint interfly. I mean, I'm just generally speaking, but that's really interesting to hear, and the value in that. It's like, okay, this is the structure, this is the baseline, and then it stems off to the respective teams, whether it's Air Force team, Army team, and all that. So when you said you got to Iraq, you were immediately attached and joined up with the Army team. What does that entail? Like, were you just one Air Force person with multiple Army, or like, what did that team consist of, and how? Talk a little bit about that, the dynamics once you get through. You know how inter-joint play, we like to bust each other's chops, but like, how did that work strategically and operationally from a team perspective?
So most of the time, what we would do is we would link up with our Army EOD counterparts, and it would be about 3 Air Force EOD techs and 2 to 3 Army EOD techs or wherever they had available. Okay. And because at first they were really big missions, right? Going out there, taking thousands of pounds of enemy munitions, moving them to a new location, downloading, big demo. So it was a lot of manpower. But then once that IED fight started, it really changed the way we were operating. We really scaled those teams back. So it would be a 2 or 3 person Air Force team attached to whatever maneuver unit needed you. So whether you're at an Army forward operating base or out with the Marines, or that's pretty much the 2 options. And then you would just integrate with them as their sole EOD capacity.
Okay. Wow. So it was a very what's the word I'm thinking of? Not transient, but very adaptable, flexible. Those aren't the best words to describe it.
That's pretty close.
But it was a very needs-based, very fluid. Again, this is probably trivializing a little bit, like a plug-and-play system. Like, okay, we have X amount of Air Force EOD personnel, we have X amount of Army, Marine Corps. Okay, and we're gonna take this team together. These, okay. Now with the Air Force, so you're out there in when I say the community, I imagine you're probably in some stressful environments, combat environments where you're dealing with EOD. Again, I can only imagine what it's like. All right, you're almost, again, I'm making generalizations here.
Yeah,
you have to put all this focus and energy on dealing with this, with the IED, to disposing of this respective threat, right? But then you have all these other multiple threats around you as a result, why you, as the specialist, subject matter expert, to deconflict that, then you're dealing with the human variable where there's multiple threats. Are you able to talk a little bit about how you dealt with that? Like, so as an EOD team, were you attached to a quick reaction force team, or what was the package, if you will, to help you, because I know how it is. Like, I have a job to do, and I need security. I need protection to be able to diffuse this threat.
Yeah. So the mission kind of dictated what that package looked like. There was a lot of times where we would be embedded with a maneuver unit. So they were going from point A to point B or to an objective, and we would be part of that package right along and kind of clear as we went to make sure that they got there safely. And there was other times where it was a QRF. There'd be a maneuver unit out there or 2 maneuver units, and they'd be out there doing their mission until they encountered a IED, and then we'd roll out with the QRF and meet them at that location to take care of it. And all of our security, in my experience, did an absolute stellar job of making sure I was able to focus on mine. So they would eliminate as many of those external issues as they could,
Mhm.
which would allow me to focus on that EOD problem that was in front of us.
Interesting. Those are just some things with experience, you think about all the variables that very rarely do you ever get to go into an environment like, all right, I I have the ability to focus exclusively on this objective. There's multiple distractions, whether they're aggressive or combat in nature, to flat tires, to the unexpected stuff where you got to deal with. Because again, I can only imagine what the level of intensity it is for you to deal with that threat and deal with all the variables that come with the EOD community to deconflict a respective disposal, in addition to all the other external, I'll say, distractions
Yeah.
that could take place that would prevent you. Speaking of distractions, I'm just going to unplug this now. I'm not going to keep logging on.
But yeah, those distractions they're definitely out there, and like you can never completely get rid of them. But I think that's where it goes back to those lessons that we learned about problem solving and decision making in EOD school. And I mean, at that point, it really ties in great to your podcast, Acknowledge to Action. That acknowledge, accept, process, plan, and take action is once you arrive on there, you know you got a problem. And you know there's a lot of variables and you know there's a lot of risk. And but you also know that you're going to solve that problem because that's what you're there to do.
Mhm.
And so you're identifying those variables, you're putting in mitigation, as many mitigation factors as you can, setting up that security, trying to stay behind armor, using those robotic platforms, using distance, and you're just mitigating risk as best you can and then working through that process. Like you're not going to be able to eliminate it all, but I mean, in the end, that's part of the game. Mitigate what you can and systematically work through it using that structure you've been taught.
Just having that awareness piece of anticipation of what could be. You know, I know with the mission profile, you have that general sense of what needs to be done, and you discuss potential variables that could put you in a position where you got to adapt in the moment. And the Intel community does a great job, the operations community, et cetera. I mean, we could go on and on. We've become pretty well versed to anticipate all the potentials, but never is it in a logical or linear way package. But it's like, oh wait, that was supposed to happen at this point, but no, it happened at this point, vice versa. And our ability to adapt, and I believe that is incredible, extremely valuable skill set that we all take. I don't care what we do in the military. You kind of naturally just kind of adapt to that and learn that and be able to apply that, whether it's from the EOD world or from the C-130 Loadmaster world, or any of the jobs in the DoD, to be able to anticipate things, plan for things, adjust, adapt. And I appreciate you acknowledging the acknowledge to action sequence, because this is over time. That's actually how this has come to fruition. My own military experience, civilian experience, personal stuff. It's like, man, you got to start with acknowledging. That comes with training. All right, they train you to what to acknowledge, what to be aware of. But then the OJT stuff, the apprenticeship stuff, and as you get experience and you work your way up the ranks, both professionally and through the pay grade wise, you know what to accept, what to kind of zero in on, to really take the action you need to be as dialed in as to be as solution focused and productive. And I should have wrote it down. It was like, what was the mission statement of the EOD school?
Initial success or total failure.
Initial success. So to be successful as possible through that action. I believe that's our goal in anything we do in life. Is like, I want to take action that's going to make me as successful as possible.
Yep.
But in life, there's a huge gray area, with that. But that's interesting. Everything I'm hearing is just what's prompting me to kind of reflect on what you're saying. So that's pretty cool. So you talked about Fairchild. We talked about, so how many deployments have, I imagine it's taken you, I imagine the Air Force and the EOD community is taking you all over the world. You talked about being in Iraq. Where else have you been? Overseas, stateside? To talk about some of those experiences.
Yeah. So at Fairchild, I knocked out 3 deployments to Iraq. So didn't get to see a
Wow.
lot of the world. I just got to see that one part of the world a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I got to spend a little bit of time in Jordan, and I traveled around the U.S. doing the EOD mission, a lot of places. So we
Oh,
do a lot of travel around the country, um, taking care of that mission. So
oh, that's pretty cool. So where did it take you stateside? Because I know like most
mhm.
careers, once you progress, you have the opportunity to become that subject matter expert or to become an instructor and all that stuff.
Yep.
And I imagine that there was opportunity for you in that, whether it's stateside or at a formal schoolhouse,
Yeah.
whatnot. So, were there any break? Did you get any breaks in between those deployments? Was there opportunity to just for it to not be so intense at times? Because I imagine being in Iraq is arguably one of the most. It's pretty intense for an EOD personnel. So,
Yeah. So after those 3 deployments, I was pretty beat up both mentally and physically, and I was kind of coming up on the end of that first 6 year enlistment. I'm like, I need to take care of myself, get out of that environment for a little bit. So I applied to go back to the Navy EOD school as an instructor, which I was really hesitant at the time, but like I said, I had to get out of that operational rotation for a minute. But once I got there, absolutely loved it. Um, Getting back in there, helping mentor and develop those new airmen, sailors, soldiers, and Marines, like actually fell in love with teaching and development. And I also got some cool opportunities when I was there. I got to help use all that experience I gained in Iraq to really help modernize the school's IED curriculum and develop some of that to make sure that the warfighters going out the door were able to hit the ground running and know what to expect on the battlefield.
oh, that's how long was that? Was that like a controlled tour, or was that like a structured? Hey, you're gonna be in the schoolhouse for X amount of time.
Yep, 4 years. It was a
For,
set 4 years. And then the other cool thing was coming out of there, you get a basic preference. So you get to make a list that the Air Force considers. And
yeah.
so coming out of there, put down Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which chose that location because it's about 90 minutes to 2 hours away from both mine and my wife's family.
Oh,
So
that's great. Okay.
had 3 kids at the time. So being able to get back that close and allow them to grow up with their grandparents for 5 or 6 years was um, it was great. It was good. It was good and healthy for everybody.
That's great to hear. How did that influence your Air Force career trajectory from there? So you had a great 4 year experience at the schoolhouse. You like, cause that in the C-130 community world too. That's my favorite part about being like I'm home station instructor, so I never got to the schoolhouse, but I hear what you're saying about being an instructor. It's there's something to it. It's hard to really define in a short, concise way, but just being an instructor, you just you're able to help develop so many people on so many different levels. It's not just being an EOD technician. It's so many other avenues of life. Professional development as a whole there's a lot that goes into that. So
Yep.
um I hear what you're saying, and that, yeah, that's pretty cool. And not, but some people aren't cut out to be instructors either. I just want to be a technician. I just want to do my job, and I'm sure those type of personality, and that's okay. We need that too. But when you identify like that, that's really cool to hear when you're able to have that experience and get that renewal, and really to recharge your batteries, professionally speaking,
Yep.
mentally and emotionally, right? So and then you went the right path. That's cool that you had uh, you were put at the top of the Air Force preference list. Like, hey,
Yeah.
it'd be great if I could go here. All right, an instructor school. So you went to Wright Pat in Ohio. How did that influence? How did that factor into your Air Force career trajectory? Because you're at year 22, right?
22. Yeah.
Yeah, so 22 years. So how did that influence how you move forward in the Air Force and to put in those years in one career field, especially a pretty challenging career field? at that.
Yeah. So getting to right Pat, I said, great, get back there to their families. But I also had a lot of learning to do myself because a little bit ago we talked about how fast technology was evolving during those years. That was the 2000. I was out of the career field from 2008 to 2012. The IED fight was really on. Technology was advancing incredibly fast for us during that time point, and I pretty much set out 4 years of that. So I had to hit the ground running, and it was almost I came out of instructor role right back into student role because I had to catch up on 4 years of technological advances that were happening on the pointy end of the spear there. So got back in there, got myself back up to speed, and right Pat was a good learning experience, not just from that, but we had a lot of big personalities there at that shop, and it was also kind of when at that point we kind of were having some pullback in the operations tempo. So all of a sudden we had a lot of people, we had a lot of big personalities, and we had quite a bit of conflict, and it was stressful at the time, but I think it was also very important that I learned how to grow through that. And what I realized was as a career field, as an Air Force, and really most places in the world, we're pretty good at training people how to do their jobs. And we're pretty good at training people how to manage resources, but we're not real good at training leaders how to actually lead people and inspire them. So that was one of those learning points I took out of there. So I started I'm like, all right, I got to do something for myself to take care of my people better. So I started doing a lot of reading, a lot of self-study. I jumped on the Air Force Master Resiliency Training Program, just started grasping at all those things to help myself become a better leader so I could start developing the next generation of leaders for the career field.
That's awesome. You really make a great point. Military, we're focused on the military and Department of Defense. They do a heck of a job training an individual to do a particular objective. Right? And there's a huge list of that we could go down. And that's challenging in and of itself, but also it's like, okay, how do we equip these individuals to deal with conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, all that stuff that, again, we could have a whole long conversation about leadership and the foundation that it takes to be an effective, adaptable leader, effective leader. But it takes an organic environment, I believe. Like Brandon, you identify like, all right, this is what I want to do to help the people I have some of the most direct influence over. Because where there's people, there's problems, but also where there's people, there's productivity. And to bridge that gap, I think a leader knows how to bridge that gap. There's always going to be problems. So like, well, what's that saying? Is like when people stop complaining and you don't hear problems, that's when the real problem exists, or it could, right? It's like, wait, why is it so quiet? Why haven't I heard anything good, bad, ugly, or indifferent? That's when it's like, whoa, something must be, really bad. But yeah, so that's interesting how you in the moment identified like, okay, this is what I have, this is what I could do for my individuals, the core individuals that I have direct influence over, whether it's direct supervision or through being colleagues with them or being in the same section. What were some of the tools you put in your toolbox, or what strategies did you use to enhance your ability to tap into that and to be able to mentor individuals and help them in that respective professional mode of their life?
Yeah, I think a lot of it came down to a few key factors. So taking ownership is a huge one, right? Taking ownership of your behaviors, taking ownership of organizational objectives, taking ownership of what goes right and what goes wrong, and not trying to cast blame on others. But then I think that one of the other things that really stood out to me during that time, and it was born from that conflict, because I think everyone was trying to go in the same direction, but everyone just had a different idea of what path they wanted to take. And so we weren't fighting about where we were going. We were fighting about how were we going to get there.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that I took and I really tried to implement was like focus on that long-term objective, focus on that long-term vision. And how you get there, as long as it's not illegal, immoral, or unethical, it probably doesn't matter, right? So when you're sitting down having that conversation and they're telling you that they're going to do A, B, C, and you want to do E, D, E, F, I'm like, just ask them, like, all right, what's that end goal? Like, okay, well, our end goals are aligned. So yeah, have at it. I don't need the credit. It doesn't have to be my way, as long as we get to where we're both trying to go.
And there's so many, I mean, there's a lot of different references we could use to like from a structure, like, oh, I got my project management cert, or there's a lot of structurally sound objective sources to take in that education and that tangible knowledge, if you will. It's the intangible. How do we apply it? That's real interesting how you said, you reference, like, if you're doing ABC, they want to do DEF, right? Or vice versa. There's so many good quotes. There's so much motivation out there. But one I read is like, hey, when plan A doesn't work, there's 25 more letters in the alphabet. And it's like, I think sometimes supervisors and all that get so fixated on plan A, or you could say plan B is figure out how to make plan A work, depending on the nature of the situation, right? And I think a leader empowers. I've known over the years, through the military, through my professional career, because I'm in the Air National Guard, so I had a dual career going for the last, almost 15 years now. It's great when you have a leader, supervisor, person in charge. Say, here's what needs to be done. Here's the tools to figure it out. Go do it. Like you said, as long as it's not immoral, unethical, just do it. Just do. Here is the guideline. Here is a big. This is your palette, not palette. Yeah, like an art palette. Like, here's the tools. Do what needs to be done. Use blue. Use red. Like, say we're inventory colors, right? I was just talking about this with the 6-year-old son. It's pretty profound what you could learn with that 6-year-old. He was telling me his favorite color is green, but he was like, there's so many different colors of green, Dad. There's so many, like infinity. Yeah. And then we talked about infinity, what infinity means. But I'm like, it's kind of right in a way. Like, green, what does that mean? Like forest green, or like I think a leader is like, hey, you could use green, but you could use the primary color. Think about the primary. That's even better. That's where I'm going. I have a point. There's a method to my madness here. But the primary colors account for all the different shades and colors. Hey, just use the primary colors and do what needs to be done to create this finished product. I think that's what a really good, effective leader does. Those are pretty broad strokes. Like, wow, I have the primary colors. Wow, you get pretty creative as far as what you want to do. But I imagine that could prompt some creativity, and that empowers your team, empowers the individual to come to their terms to what they could figure out how to do it. But a good leader will say, hey, this is what needs to be done. Keep me posted. Here's the tools you have. If you need more, let me know. We'll have that conversation, and boom. I think that's where the magic can happen. Like that. And
I agree. Like, we can't get caught up in whether we use lime green or forest green.
Yeah.
Get the intent out there, set the left and right boundaries, and let it go.
Yeah, exactly. Now, if you say, hey, use red and then use blue, all right, that's a clear. All right, I got to do the C-130 plug. Like, when we're doing airdrops, hey, there's a red light and a green light for a reason. When we're doing airdrops, it's very clear. Some things are very clear cut. Red means stop, green means go. As far as but with a lot of other things and objectives and life, there's a variety. I like how you said, like, here's the destination, but there's hundreds of thousands of paths to get there. Let's not argue about, well, let's take this path. No, like, hey, no, as long as the path gets you there, and you have the compass and you have a map and you have the baseline tools to keep you calibrated, to keep you grounded, go for it. Communicate accordingly, and see you there. That's kind of. And I think that was my draw to that. I think that's how we grab. Well, I can say for me, what gravitated me towards you, Brandon, because you put a lot of good stuff on LinkedIn. You got some amazing. You got 22 years of some really awesome experience, and you, again, this is just from an observation and now an engagement point. I see what you're doing on LinkedIn to put that in a tangible means, and that's that's accessible, and in the LinkedIn community, and like any network that grows. But it's really cool to see how you're taking you're inventorying your experience and putting in a practical means for others to tap into, utilize. So with that said, with 22 years, it's not a matter if, it's a matter of when your Air Force career is, comes to a conclusion, right? So, are you allowed to talk a little bit about that? Do you want to talk about that, or can you just talk about how you're going to transition to when that day comes, and some of the things you're doing to prepare for that?
Yeah, so I think we're going to shoot for August of 2025.
Okay.
That's when we're going to wrap it up.
You heard it here first, folks. No.
Heard it here first. Yeah. And honestly, I made that decision probably last August.
Okay.
So, I mean, that decision.
So about 2 year out. So
about 2 years out, right?
2 years. Okay.
And it's not, I still love what I'm doing, but it's coming to a close. That'll be 23 and a half years of doing the best job in the Air Force, explosive ordnance disposal. But it's also been 23 and a half years of sacrifice for both me and my family. It's time to make sure that they can put themselves first as well, because they're at those ages where they need to be able to put down roots and develop those relationships and strike out on their own. So I need to be able to facilitate that. But so that's why. But what I'm doing is, I knew I needed to decide early, because I knew I needed to be able to put a plan in place, because I see a lot of veterans out there that, I mean, they struggle because you've been in the Air Force, and the Air Force has been taking care of you and taking care of me for now 22 years. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like leaving home for the first time. You got to go out and you got to find a new job. You got to figure out insurance and how to set up a dental appointment and all these things. So I leaned back into that exact same thing I've done throughout my entire Air Force EOD career, is like, all right, what is that structure that I need to be able to identify those variables, mitigate the risk, put a plan together, and attack the problem. So, I mean, looking out for figuring out what I want to do post Air Force, decided like, all right, I want to get in that leadership and organizational development space, which I've loved since I started at EOD school as an instructor and got on as a master resiliency trainer. And like, how do I break into that space? So I went out and got my master's in organizational leadership, just wrapped that up a few weeks ago. Got certified to teach leadership and team communication through Mark Tilsher at Giant. And then I started working with the great people over at Charleston County Public Works, helping them do some leadership facilitation so I can get some real world experience in that private sector. And all that's been great. But I also realized that getting a job's only one small point of it, because a lot of the issues I see with veterans transitioning is more in that resilience realm, right? So how do I make sure that I build myself an off-ramp and make sure that mentally, physically, socially, and spiritually, I'm ready for that transition? So I kind of look back over that entire 22-year Air Force career. It's like, all right, what are the things that were really good, that I really loved? The EOD community, the great people I worked with, having that purpose, that passion. How do I bottle that up and carry that forth? So like, all right, I got 2 years to build it. I don't want to build it when I get out. So I started working on all those job skills, but I also started working on like personal growth. I cut out alcohol because I know that mentally and physically, that's not good for me. Like, I've had a long relationship with it, and it hasn't been a good one. So
yeah, the return on investment is not. Yeah.
Yes. I cut that out because now when I get out, that's not going to be a coping mechanism. That's not something I'm going to revert back to. I got into triathlons here in Charleston. So I have a physical outlet that I'm building up, which is also helps me socially have that group to work with, getting involved in the community, and then finding that purpose. So once I leave the Air Force, I have other things that I can lean into that matter, like working with the local school boards, working with Charleston County Public Works. But I just need to have that off ramp built before I get out, before I started that transition. So that resilience stays topped off.
That's great. I'm as I do more of these episodes, I'm trying not to use cliches, and I'm becoming overly like aware of it, and like, but like my point, like I use life hack toolbox. It's like, okay, life hack, but no, in all seriousness, like adding you got to build up your life hack toolbox when the sun is shining. What's that saying? Like, the time to plan for a rainy day is when the sun is out, right? I get that from a cartoon. I'm an 80s guy watching cartoons. Saturday morning. Here we are recording Saturday morning. 35 years ago, I was watching some awesome Saturday morning cartoons at this point. So maybe that's why I'm feeling a little nostalgic today. But you're building your life hack toolbox with those, with that skill set, with being a little bit vulnerable, and putting yourself out there, putting yourself in new environments that are going to challenge you, that are going to make you more resilient, and everything you just mentioned, you down the list. So when that day comes, a year and some change from now, it's like I'm equipped to do that. And I believe that it's a little bit easier to do over a 20-year career because you have more time. But whether an individual is doing 4-year, 6-year enlistment, I mean, you almost have to start your transition out from the day you come in. And that I think that's for 18, 19-year-old average, that's tough. That's tough. And even when they're getting close, I just want to get out, and I'll figure it out when I get out. And I think that's where a lot of the challenges can stem from. So I think DoD could do better as far as equipping the individual, whether we have them for 4 years or 20 plus years. How are we equipping them to deal with that transition? Because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I know that the DoD's job is to train. The objective is to train them to do a particular skill set in the military. It's with leaders like yourself and mentors like yourself that take it upon yourself to do that, to equip. Because I could only imagine how impactful that is to the individuals that had the opportunity to serve with you with you as your supervisor, etc., to be able to learn those intangibles and all that. So that's great advice. And again, that's something people hear like, okay, I get it. Start planning 2 years out. It's really how you do it is a different ball game. That comes down to the individual. I like how you said for your kids, like learning how to strike out on their own. That's pretty. I'm gonna borrow that. I'm like, then you said, I'm like, because we got to learn how to strike out on our own and adapt, because then nobody's gonna bat 1,000. Having a 300 average in baseball is good. That's like, dude, you're kicking ass if you have even if you're 250. That's, what is that? Well, what's the 250 average? So if you're batting 1,000, that's like 1 out of every 4 hits, right? It's like 1 out of 4. It's like that. So you're failing 3 you're striking out, or you're not successful 3 out of the 4 times, right?
Yep.
But on the context of where in the environment that you're in, it's like, man, 250 could be really good, 300 even better. So I think we have to find ways to build our own toolbox so we could apply those tools and those skill sets and those intangibles. So if we're in an environment where 250 is very successful, boom, it's what we have, what we need. Or if it's more of an environment like an EOD, it's like complete success or total failure. It's like, okay, like it's not rare that most people are in those situations, but it could feel that way sometimes when we're applying for a job, or like, man, if I don't get this, oh my God, what's going to happen? But putting in perspective, using all those tools that skill sets to help manage that. So that's great advice. So what else so wherever, to our listeners, what advice do you have for whether they're just going into the military, they're in progress with their military career, or getting out, or anybody listening to this with their journey, to help with the acknowledge to action process? what advice do you have for them to help them and enhance their tools that they already have, or add more of a skill set to their inventory?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that it's been a thread throughout this entire talk is you have to have a structure. You have to have some framework that you can lean on. And because I think it was James Clear said it, is you're going to fall back to your systems. So when you're hot, tired, hungry, exhausted, you're going to fall back to whatever structure you've built. So make sure that you've taken the time to build that structure. And when you do that, and when you do anything, you need to lean into your own authenticity. It only works if you know your values, if you know your organization's values. Your vision and your goals have to be crystal clear, because that's how you work through adversity. Is you have that long-term horizon that you know where you're going. They're not failures. They're just setbacks. They're just redirects. But they're not failures, because I'm going to keep working towards that long-term vision. And then make sure you build up those relationships and network, and that you have that trust in those people that can help keep moving you forward.
That's great advice. Building that foundation, building a foundation is a lot of work. Is no joke. Whether it's a home, whether it's a physical thing, but having that strong foundation, those core values, and to fall back on, you could always go back to the source and not rehab it, but sometimes we need a full rehab. Sometimes we need to fix it. It makes it easier having that sound structure foundation, but you got to put that work in up front. You got to front load that work, and that is an acknowledgement piece that is important for. And you don't have to be 15 years old to have it all figured out and have a fully dialed in plan. But just having that awareness piece at some point in your life. It happened to me later in my years. I went into the military later. It was a line of sight. I had my reasons for going in, and I'm thankful for it. But it redirected me. It put me it prompted me to, okay, now is my time to build my foundation in a way that's more for a desirable outcome down the road. That's great. You going back to earlier in our conversation, you mentioned you had a "if not me, then who" moment, and I don't want to break our train of thought there. Because you were saying some really good stuff, but you referenced the Travis Manion Foundation. That's like the core Speaking of core values and structure and foundation, earlier this week I actually did a Travis Manion Foundation, and just a little plug of things that I do with the Travis Manion Foundation. But when you said that, I'm like, wow, that's pretty that's impactful. Speaking of core values, Travis Manion was killed in action in 2008, and the Travis Manion Foundation said, "If not me, then who?" And those 5 words are incredibly impactful. You used it as your opening. I'm like, wow, that shows you how a structure and core values can be so meaningful and so motivating and impactful.
Yeah, and that's something like I try to instill that in the airmen that I work with, but that's something I've tried to instill in like my kids as well. Is like when you come across something, you got 2 choices. Like you can either just accept it and move on, or you can fight like heck to change it. But I mean, it's almost a binary decision, is because everything in the middle ground, we can have a lot of cool conversations, but we're not going to move the needle. So either accept it and let it go, or you fight like heck to change it. And it's kind of like that. If I think it needs to be changed, if not me, then who? I'm going to dive into that and do my best.
That's great. That's awesome. And that just goes into a common recurring theme that has been in the episodes to date with Acknowledged Action is post-military MEPS, the mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, and social. And we need to address those, whether how aware of that we are in the moment or not. Sometimes it's more mental, sometimes it's more emotional, sometimes it's more physical, and so on and so forth. And so in having access to these conversations and hearing other people's experience, we could learn from that and say, oh, this is an outlet for me to address the social component. And that's what the Travis Manion Foundation does for me and for so many others. Like, hey, it allows me to connect with the community. But that's just you got to identify what works for you in your environment. What grounds you out? What grounds you out and what helps you spiritually? What helps you emotionally? And that's where we go back to what you were saying is like, what's the objective here? And is it to manage post-military MEPs? Okay, there's like going back to my son's green, there's infinity ways to do that. If post-military represents green, okay, you want to take the lime route, lime green route, forest green, whatever. As long as it's green, go for it. All right. Who knows? That was a kind of a cool how we brought that together. But like, there's thousands of shades of green, just like so many other different contexts in life. Just identify it, focus, acknowledge it, and talk about it. Make yourself a little bit vulnerable. Get a little bit comfortable with being uncomfortable. Ask for help. Build that network. Go against the grain of what maybe you might be used to. And as long as it's for those, like you said, those core values. Am I doing it for the right reasons? Is it honest? Is it respectful? All those different things. And I think that's what can really help with our own readjustment, whether we're about to get out, have been out for a while, who knows, any aspect of our life. Brandon, thanks so much for this inspiring conversation. I really enjoyed having this nostalgic Saturday morning conversation record with you. It's been great to learn about the EOD community, learn more about your background, where you're headed and all that stuff. So much value, so much takeaway. So I can't thank you enough for being here today.
You're welcome. It was an honor and a privilege to sit down with you and have this talk.
Oh, this is going to be accessible on a variety of different platforms. But if you think of anything that you want to add to it, like a link, or I know once we stop recording, it's like, oh, I know that's how I am. Like, oh man, I want to. I should have shared this link. Know that we have our own network now on LinkedIn, and we could easily share that to our networks as well, and also too with Acknowledge Action. It's in progress. I don't have the exact specifics yet, but I just know what direction I want Acknowledge Action to go in. Once a month, I'm probably going to scale back to one individual podcast like what we're having here today, once a month, and then once a month have like a group all call. That's probably the last thing you want to hear if you're in the middle. All call. Oh, gee, though, that's the last thing you want to do. Like I got out of the military because that's one of the reasons it was all call. But in a much more personalized way, like an all call for veterans to. So you're always welcome to that. And as I get the details, I'll share it.
Please do.
So that way we could have a collaborative interact. It's going to be set up to where people call in or they could access the podcast through the recorded format. So I just know I have the baseline, I have the foundation for it. I just need to start branching it out and get into the next phase of development for that. We have the Acknowledge Action music playlist. It's accessible on Spotify and YouTube Music now. It's an awesome play. I'm a little bit biased towards it because there's some meaning. Everyone I talk to has dedicated a song, so I now listen to those songs in a different way, which is really cool stuff. But what song do you want to dedicate to the Acknowledge Action playlist?
Song that I'm gonna throw on there is gonna be "Higher" by Eminem.
Okay.
It's got some good edge to it, but it's about just always pushing, never stopping, and trying to reach your full potential. So yeah, "Higher" by Eminem is the one that I go to before I have to jump on a podcast or make a talk. So
he's have stood the test of time. I know he was when I don't know his first or second album off the top of my head came out. It was in the late 90s, early 2000s. I remember being in Guam, TDY there, and just something about Eminem and the nostalgic and the change that very, very influential over the years. That's our second Eminem song on the playlist. So there's your theme here. He's influenced quite a few veterans, I imagine. So I know he has for me and has for you. So Brandon, thank you again. I look forward to our continued relationship, our network. For everyone listening, check them out on LinkedIn. Brandon, every post I see is like, man, there's very great thought and intent and value that goes into it. So I value it, and I know so many others can and will from it as well.
Awesome. Appreciate the support and the kind words.
Oh, same, Brandon. And I look forward to staying in touch. Thanks again. And this is a great access point for so many. So appreciate you.
Of course, Matt. Have a good day.
All right. You too. Thank you for joining us on this insightful conversation with Brandon Gingrich. We hope you gained valuable perspectives on the demanding yet rewarding career of an explosive ordnance disposal technician and the vital role of mentorship and teamwork in such a high-stakes field. Brandon's experiences offer a powerful reminder of the importance of adaptability, resilience, and having a clear vision, not only in military service, but also in life's transitions. If you're a veteran or someone preparing for a major change, we hope Brandon's advice on embracing personal growth and staying true to your values resonates with you. Thank you for joining us today. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with others who might benefit. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast for more inspiring stories and insights. Wherever you are on your journey, you are not alone. Remember, the journey doesn't end here. Keep pushing forward, stay connected to your community, and always strive to build strong, authentic relationships. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and keep moving from acknowledge to action. This is the Acknowledge to Action podcast.